Israel shouldn't exist as a startup superpower. Not on paper, not in theory, not with the terrain it was given. It sits in one of the most geopolitically tense regions on Earth. It has almost no natural resources, no oil boom, no big minerals, no sprawling farmland to feed industries. But somehow, a country of fewer people than New York City built one of the most aggressive, dense, and export-heavy innovation ecosystems on the planet. And here's the part the rest of the world quietly hates to admit. It wasn't luck. It was engineered. This story isn't about startup culture or inspirational founder quotes. It's about how a tiny state used war, necessity, and scarcity to manufacture one of the most profitable economic identities ever built, technology as a national product. And if you want to understand modern power, you have to understand how they did it. First, timing. When Israel declared statehood in 1948, it inherited almost nothing: sand, conflict, and an obligation to survive. There was no oil, no rich colonial infrastructure, no deep export markets. But there was one asset: people who couldn't afford to waste time. Early Israel became a place where speed wasn't a business philosophy. It was the difference between existing and not existing. You see that pattern over and over. Urgency creates efficiency. Scarcity creates creativity. Risk tolerance becomes cultural, not corporate. But the real twist comes a few decades later when the country realizes something strange. Forced military conscription was producing a side effect. Not discipline, not patriotism, but networks. In most countries, elites meet in universities or business clubs. In Israel, they met in units like 8200, cyber, signals, surveillance, encryption, high-stress decision environments. If Silicon Valley invented the garage startup, Israel invented the military cohort startup. The math gets interesting fast. Elite units take teenagers, expose them to classified tech, compress years of problem-solving into months, teach leadership under uncertainty, then release them into the civilian world in their early 20s. Now imagine those same people raised in a culture where failure is normal, risk is mandatory, and improvisation is survival. Place that talent against an economy with no natural resources, and you get a country with only one real export: technology. Here's the part that looks like magic on charts. By the 1990s, Israel had more startups per capita than any country on Earth. By the 2000s, it was second only to the US in NASDAQ-listed companies. By the 2010s, it became a global hub for cybersecurity, autonomous vehicles, semiconductors, medical tech, and military-grade hardware. The numbers are absurdly compact. Population around 9 million, landmass smaller than New Jersey, but venture capital? Israel consumes more VC per capita than almost anywhere else. It's not even close. The cynical observer might say that's just US money. Partly true, but here's the uncomfortable detail most people miss. Foreign capital didn't build Israel's tech scene. It amplified a machine that already existed. The state did something rare and strategic. It co-invested. In 1993, the government launched Yozma, a program that matched private venture investment with public money, then deliberately took a smaller share of the upside so investors had incentive to take risk. When the model worked, the government sold its stake and backed away. It almost never happens that cleanly in economic policy. Meanwhile, taxes didn't fund a giant tech fantasy. Defense spending did. Cold War threats funded research labs. Regional conflict funded encryption. Terror threats funded cyber infrastructures, secure communications, drones, and surveillance tech that later got commercialized. Once again, necessity became product. But here's where the story turns from impressive to uncomfortable. Tech ecosystems need scale, either population or market. Israel has neither, so it built a cheat code: exit culture. Startups in Israel don't dream of becoming Apple. They dream of being bought by Apple. It's a brutally efficient strategy. A company builds fast, proves the concept, then sells to US giants like Intel, Microsoft, Google, Meta, Nvidia, Cisco, Qualcomm. The founders get liquidity, the acquirer gets tech and talent, the ecosystem gets recycled capital and experience. The irony, most of the Israeli tech boom now runs inside American companies. Intel's biggest R&D center outside the US is in Israel. NVIDIA's biggest acquisition in history was an Israeli company. Mobileye, Waze, Annapurna Labs, ICQ, Checkpoint, Mellanox, the list is long and uncomfortable for anyone who believes national industries must stay national. Israel figured out a rule most countries still resist. If you're too small to own the market, sell the innovation and keep the talent. Now the zoom out. Does this model have weaknesses? Absolutely. Israel's tech economy is incredibly concentrated. It depends heavily on foreign capital. It depends on geopolitical stability that is anything but stable. And it depends on a delicate social contract, high military input, high risk tolerance, and a belief that tech, not land or natural resources, is the real engine of national security. Break any of those, and the machine becomes fragile. There's also a demographic tension quietly brewing. Ultra-Orthodox populations don't participate in the same defense and tech pipelines that fuel the innovation economy. Foreign investors worry about political volatility. Global competition is catching up. And for the first time in 2 decades, founders are asking a dangerous question. Will the machine still work? But maybe that's the real lesson. Israel didn't win because it had a perfect plan. It won because it figured out how to monetize scarcity, militarize innovation, and extract value from urgency. Most countries try to innovate in comfort. Israel innovated because comfort wasn't an option. So the final question isn't whether Israel can stay a startup superpower. It's whether the rest of the world can replicate a model built on pressure, fear, and necessity without the pressure, fear, and necessity that created it. Because if not, then the most valuable resource in the modern economy isn't oil or land or labor, it's crisis. And that's a hard resource to manufacture on purpose.